Why believe in Jesus? Is there evidence for Jesus and the resurrection? We're asked in 1 Peter 3:15 in the Bible to be ready to give an answer to all those who ask about our hope in Christ. Why do this? Well, Christ is who we profess we have faith in, and the Christian life is the way we profess our faith in Christ. The two are inseparable. To accept Jesus is to accept a way of life that he calls us to. Is faith in Christ more than just blind acceptance? And is faith weaker for having evidence? Hebrews chapter 11 tells us that faith is the assurance of things not seen. Well, faith is still needed for the unseen, but there are things we can see that will help us give an answer to all those who ask about our hope in Christ. The question is, was there a historical Jesus? And the answer is yes. The man the New Testament record calls Jesus actually lived in the first century. He is mentioned by a great many of the early church fathers. Many of these knew and heard teachings by the apostles. For example, Clement, Ignatius, Polycarp, Barnabas, Diognetus, and Irenaeus. Jesus is also mentioned by Greek historians of the 1st and early 2nd centuries AD. There are many non-Christian sources. Amongst them are these. Pliny. Pliny, in a letter to the Emperor Trajan, this civil servant of Bithynia, which is in Turkey now, asked Trajan how to deal with Christians whose practice it was to assemble and sing hymns to Christ as if to God. Pliny had never come across Christians before, and as far as the Romans were concerned, the emperor was God. So he wrote to Trajan and asked how he should deal with these people. Tacitus, he's considered one of the greatest Roman historians, and he gives the earliest non-Christian reference in the context of writing about the Great Fire of Rome. He speaks of Christians, Christ, and his execution by Pontius Pilate. This is a man who was climbing the Roman political ladder. Do you really think he would commit in writing to something that just wasn't true? He was writing an actual history. Suetonius, who wrote about the 12 Caesars, he wrote that the Emperor Claudius expelled Jews from Rome because of constant tumults under the leadership of Christus. This corresponds with the expulsion written of in Acts. Why would we accept what Suetonius says whilst rejecting what's written in Acts? Another non-Christian source is Josephus, who was actually a Jew, but he was unsympathetic to Christians, and he wrote a history of the Jews for the Romans. Amongst these writings he says, about this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. They, that's his disciples, reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion. He also goes on to say about Ananus, who assembled the Sanhedrin of the judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who is Christ, whose name was James. So here is someone who has no interest in promoting Christianity, talking about James, the brother of Jesus Christ, being called before the Sanhedrin. Why would he write about these things if they just weren't true? We know from the Bible that Jesus, who is Christ, had a brother called James. And here is someone who isn't sympathetic to that view, just writing about it as a matter of fact. The most important historical event in the history of Christ is, of course, his resurrection. If this event is true, then all the things that the Gospels relate about Christ are true. If it's false, then everything's false. So here's some facts about the record of Christ's resurrection. First of all, there are 4 biblical accounts of this event. We can't deny these biblical accounts because they correspond with what non-Christian writers have said about Jesus being on the earth. So either these biblical accounts mean something or they mean nothing at all. That is, they're either fabricated lies or truthful historical records. There are no writings of contemporary history, that is, history that was written around about the same time then, just after Jesus had been on the earth. There are no contemporary history writing, denying or contradicting these accounts. All contemporary non-biblical references to his resurrection assume it to be a fact. The atheist who is not able to produce any documents contrary to these accounts must reject them on the basis of disbelief alone. Surely another historian who knew these things were incorrect at the time would have corrected it then, and could have done so easily. But non-Christian history records the census at the time of Jesus' birth, a strange darkness over the land at his death, and many, many other things. How can we reject one and accept the other? All accounts must be true. So the atheist is trapped between the obvious historical nature of the gospel records and the miraculous nature of Christ's resurrection. Taking into account, then, the Bible's historical accuracy, the wealth of non-biblical historical accounts, how do you deal with Christ's resurrection? Atheists and some liberal theologians, whilst accepting in a general way the gospel accounts of his life, deny that he was raised from the dead. They do this by presenting several different theories. There is the unconscious or swoon theory, where it's claimed that though Jesus was crucified, he never actually died, he was only unconscious. Well, please note, the Roman soldiers were trained to kill, and they knew a dead body when they saw it. So let's consider that Matthew 27 and verse 50 says, "And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit." In Mark 15 and verse 37, the writer says, "And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last." In Luke 23 and verse 46, "Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And quite tellingly, in John 19 verses 33 to 35, we're told, "But when they," that is the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, "when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs." It used to be that if it was going on a bit, that the crucified person would have his legs broken so he couldn't support himself anymore and keep breathing. So when they came and saw he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out. The one who saw it has testified to this, and his testimony is true. He knows that he is telling the truth so that you also may believe. And as we've already seen, non-Christian historians and writers wrote about the fact that Jesus died and was raised again. There is the spirit theory, which says that only the spirit of Jesus was raised, not his body. Well, first of all, in Matthew 28 and verse 6, we see that the tomb was empty. The body was gone. The angel said to those who came to look, "He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay." The apostles preached a bodily resurrection. In 1 Corinthians 15, it's worth reading the whole chapter, we see that many people, including 500 at one time, saw Jesus after his resurrection. Take note, the only thing that can be raised is that which dies. Our spirit doesn't die. Jesus was dead and his body was raised. The vision theory. Some say that Jesus only appeared to the disciples in vision form. What we already saw in 1 Corinthians 15. Many people must have seen that same vision at the exact same time. How did that happen? Also, the disciples ate with him and touched him. In John 20 and verse 27, then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." In John 21, verses 13 and 15, Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, and then it goes on to talk about a conversation they had. But they all ate breakfast together. In this instance, the atheists who believe this vision theory actually have to create a miracle to remove a miracle. It's not reasonable. The women were mistaken theory. It said that the women went to the wrong tomb. Such reasoning is quite absurd. The men who went after the women told them that Jesus was risen must have run to the wrong tomb as well. Would they have done that? Were the angels who were at the tomb saying that he'd risen also mistaken? Why didn't the enemies of Christ point it out and say you came to the wrong tomb? He's still buried over here. It didn't happen. The Joseph of Arimathea theory. Some claim that Joseph, whose tomb Jesus was buried in, removed the body to a different location. How did he convince the guards to let him have the body? These were people who were under penalty of death to guard the body. They would not have just released it. If Joseph was a real person, why not accept what it says about his character? After all, people are saying Jesus didn't rise, Joseph did this. So you must believe Joseph existed. But he was respected. In Mark 15 and verse 43, he was told he was respected in the whole community. Would such a man intentionally deceive others? What about the disciples? This theory says that the Lord's disciples removed the body. If they did, why did the soldiers have to be bribed to tell it as a story and say that it happened while they were asleep? If it actually happened, they didn't have to be bribed to tell a story, as Matthew 28 verses 11 and 15 tells us. And if they were asleep, how do they know who stole the body? They'd wake up and it would be gone. If the disciples removed the body, then they lied about the resurrection. However, these men gave their lives defending the resurrection. Would anyone give their lives defending a known lie? What about the enemies of the cross? Some claim that the enemies of Christ stole his body. The question is, why would they do this? What purpose would it have served? By stealing his body, they would have only enhanced the disciples' claim that he'd been raised from the dead. If they did steal it, why didn't they produce it and refute the claim that Jesus was raised from the dead and say, look, we did it, here's the body? Of course, it didn't happen. So we're left asking, is Jesus the Son of God? This idea that the historical man Jesus could not have said what he said and still be good was most famously developed by C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity. Lewis was writing to those who say, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. To them, C.S. Lewis says this: a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So this is known as the trilemma. That being that Jesus did exist on earth as recorded in the Bible and non-Christian histories. So now we must ask, is he mad? Is he bad? Or is he God? So the observations used in this argument are that if Jesus claims to be God, not really knowing that he isn't God, then he's not rationally reliable. That he's not a rational person who we can take notice of. If Jesus claims to be God, knowing that he isn't God, then he's not morally reliable. He's being deceptive. He's lying. Jesus is not presented anywhere as rationally or morally unreliable in any biblical or historical writings. Therefore, we have to conclude that he is who he claims to be, the Son of God. But what do you say? Who do you say Jesus is? We know the Jesus of the Bible did exist. History attests to it. We know he did not present as a bad man or a madman. We are left with one other option. As Thomas said on seeing his friend Jesus resurrected from the dead, he is my Lord and my God. If you would like to look further at this and expand on some of the arguments that are made, then please do take a look at these books if you can. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, who of course was a believer, but wrote this great work which I think you'll find very helpful. The following 3 books, the 3 authors there set out to disprove the resurrection, but in their investigations the result was they couldn't deny the evidence. Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison, More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell, and The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. These are people who are lawyers, college professors, newspaper reporters, investigative journalists, people who examine the evidence from the standpoint that we're going to prove Christianity wrong, and they ended up believing because of what they saw. Christianity, A Clear Case of History by Edward C. Wharton also outlines a lot of the things that we've mentioned in this talk. Please take a look further at them and examine the evidence for yourself. It's there, and it attests to the fact that Jesus Christ was a real person on the earth who came here to die to set us free from sin and raised so that we also could live again with him. If you'd like to study further or know more, please contact us through this YouTube channel or in the following ways: on our Facebook page, Northampton Church of Christ, on Twitter, again at Northampton COC, our YouTube channel, Northampton Church of Christ, and even listen to lessons online with our online radio service, the Church of Christ Radio UK. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful.